Thank you for joining me today on Geezers of Gear, episode number 207. This episode is brought to you by Act Entertainment. The new Argo 6 FX wash fixture builds on the incredible liquid effects and optical fidelity of its larger brother, Zonda 9, with an IP65 rating in an astoundingly small and lightweight frame. Capable of reliably producing over 4 billion colors with up to 13,000 lumens, the new Argo 6 FX is at home at the opera, the theme park, the concert stage, the runway, or the theater. Pursuing excellence everywhere has never been easier. Act Entertainment is thrilled to bring you the Ayrton Argo 6 FX to North America and can't wait to show it to you. Learn more by visiting actentertainment.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by GearSource.com. GearSource was founded in 2002 with a mission to help global live events businesses move gear around the planet. Since that time, the company has transacted in more than 100 countries and has sold almost $250 million in sound, lighting, staging, and video gear. Now GearSource has completely evolved its platform to enable massive global growth, enabling 14 different localized currencies, escrowed payments that protect buyers and sellers, AI-enabled logistics behind a new global logistics brand, GearMoves, and so much more. Visit GearSource.com today and expand your access to global markets for your gear and global gear for your markets. And once more, please visit coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K.com, and look for Geezer's Grind. Geezer's Grind supports Roby Backstage, which in turn supports folks in our industries who have injuries, medical conditions, or other challenges in life. All of the proceeds from every bag of coffee that you buy from Coffee Cult, every bag of Geezer's Grind coffee that you buy from Coffee Cult, all the proceeds go to Roby Backstage to support those individuals. And by the way, it's incredible coffee. So please visit coffeecult.com today. I'm excited today. I don't even have an intro because I'm so excited about today's guest. Today's guest is literally at the top of the food chain when it comes to lighting massive television productions. There's nobody bigger. I like a lot of the other guys that are out there, but this guy is the OG of televised event lighting, production lighting, and just massive TV productions. He's probably best known for his work on the Grammys, the Academy Awards, Emmy Awards, Golden Globes, BET Awards, and on and on and on. But did you know that Bob Dickinson has also done a bunch of Olympic openings and Olympic closings? Those are huge events. 13 Super Bowl halftime shows. Literally, there's no one on the planet who knows more about lighting massive televised events than Bob Dickinson. And so I'm very excited to talk with Bob today. So let us go ahead and bring him on. Hello, Bob. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well.
Good. Yeah, no, it's very nice to see you. And we have met. We've met a couple of times, probably at trade shows. And I was at one of the Grammy Awards where I think when I was with Martin, we had supplied some lighting for it. And we talked a little bit then. Probably you were yelling at me because my lights weren't working or something. But yelling nicely, very nicely.
No. I never yell.
Yeah.
But I probably was complaining about the fan noise.
I'm sure. Yeah. I'll tell you, the Danes took a little while to accept that. Like it was, because I was with Martin in the early days when the lights were much more difficult or terrible, than they are today. And sometimes, like, they had all these Danish engineers, and they were led by this one guy named Finn Kallestrup. Amazing guy, really, really nice guy, but sort of an industrial designer or an industrial engineer that made things work and made things, inexpensive. But he didn't really make things with the nuances, that designers would want or that that the applications required, and one of those was silence, or at least bearable noise. So yeah, fan noise would have been one of them. I'm sure there were other ones. Like I seem to recall you used for one of the Grammy Awards, you used when Martin came out with the first light with shutters called the PAL, and
Mm-hmm.
it was brilliant in thought, but a little soft in execution in some sense. And for example, the lamp, the way where the lamp was focused, it would burn holes in the shutters.
Yeah, I was going to say I remember the shutter problems very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So it would either burn holes in them or it would seize them. Like it would
Yeah.
basically weld them together.
Or you would shutter in one queue, and then the next queue they're supposed to release,
Yeah.
and you go to the next queue and there's a big line over someone's face, or
Yeah. Yeah.
they
Yeah, no,
were.
again, I mean, it was just that was probably more of an optical problem than anything else. Like the way they designed the optical train in it just put too much heat on some of the things that really didn't want to have heat on them. And the shutters were a big one. Like if you went blackout for too long on that fixture, you literally burned a hole through the shutters and the light would come on, and you're like, wait, these are blacked out. What's going on? And
It was a very interesting time though for moving lights, because when moving lights first appeared, I used them, I think, the first time on broadcast television at all,
mhm,
on solid gold.
yeah,
um, I got a dozen Panaspots,
right.
and I put them in the air, and Dolly Parton was singing, and this was we put a little smoke in the air, and she's singing "Potential New Boyfriend" or some song, and these shafts of light that were coming from the sky, there were just 12 of them in a row on a single pipe we had put them in, and on the chorus they started to go like this, and the producers thought it was like the second coming. It was unbelievable what
Oh
just
my God.
happened on our stage. And so we grasped hold of those that concept, and used them primarily as tricks, things in the background to make scenery, or to create movement and excitement. And so they really, really worked well with music.
Right.
But then something happened. And from, like, by the early 90s, on shows like the Oscars, I no longer was hanging conventional instrumentation over the stage. I was now depending entirely on moving lights.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Brave.
so they had moved from trick, lighting, to actual workhorse lighting.
Yeah.
And they obviously offered a wide spectrum of color, and they, being as they could be refocused, they were multitasking throughout the show.
Yeah.
This moment they're lighting scenery, the next moment they're backlight wash, and
Yeah.
they had different personalities they had to assume throughout the course of the evening or the show.
Yeah.
um, but there was always this spill problem,
Yeah.
and that's where the shutters came in. It was like
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah.
Finally we have a Leco.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so scenery or people could be isolated. The drummer's light did not get all over the bass player, and
Yeah.
all that
Yep.
kind of stuff.
Well, also theater
And
applications. It opened moving lights up much more into theater applications as well for the same reasons, for the darkness more so than the light, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the lighting design is all about control.
Yeah.
Where we the more a luminaire can be controlled and sculpted, the more useful it is. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was an incredible and necessary step for moving lights to make, and it
Yeah.
did take it into that more wide ranging application,
Yeah.
because you had an instrument that could actually be controlled.
Well,
And
I would assume you weren't there, but LDI in Miami, which I believe was 1994, maybe 95, 94. Um, I was heading Martin at that time, and we did this show where Peter Morse designed it for us, and it started with um, this clown, and I forget who the clown was. It was like an old what was the clown that Peter shaped him after? I can't remember, but you know, it was a real old school clown, and there was a spot up on a scrim in front of the audience. So the audience were coming in, and this clown was basically acting like a janitor, and he was dressed like a clown and in raggedy old clothes and stuff. And he had this feather brush, and at one point when most of the audience was seated, and there was real soft circus music playing in the background, and when the audience was mostly seated, he noticed this spot on the scrim, and just with the feather brush, he'd be like trying to brush off the spot, and he'd be brushing the edges of it, and an edge would move in, and the whole audience would go quiet. You know, it was like this collective, like, what just happened here, you know? Because they knew it was a moving light, but all of a sudden the shutters started coming in, and by the end, the thing was shuttered down to a little tiny square, and you know, it always got applause, and everybody was really excited by it. So sometimes being first is great. The problem was the problems, you know, like Martin had to figure out a lot of things that other companies were able to sort of capitalize on and fix in their versions of shuttered lights. And now, of course, you can get the cheapest imported lights from anywhere that all have shutters. Everything has shutters now, as it should.
yeah, and fortunately, moving from high discharge to LED, the heat factor is not nearly as daunting as
Yeah.
it was in those beginning days.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, of
know,
course.
you talk about though technology and early technology and how many times we've been burned by it. A quick story here is I was doing the Oscars. The very first year I did the Oscars was 1983. Hard to believe, 40 years.
That's wild.
And so I had, of course, being a young designer, fearless, I designed my first year on the Oscars. The previous year, they had hung 2,000 instruments over the stage. It's hard to even imagine how
Wow.
they were able to do that, but they did. And I came in with a lot of moving lights. At the time, it was all Morpheus could even supply. There was about 200 lights or so, and we designed the show though so that all the scenery would come in and out, and I was able to use the different, you know, for each scenic configuration, I could brush it from different angles and I could sculpt it, and we had a level of control over the environment that had never been experienced before, and I was feeling really good about the show. I thought this feels a lot different, and it's a lot more theatrical, and it's less predictable, and it's less washed out. And about 3/4 of the way through the dress rehearsal, all the lights in the rig just went boom, sideways, pointed off stage right, turned on full, shuttered, and there were actually no shutters, iris all the way open. And so I said to the controller, which John Richardson at the time, who owned Morpheus,
Yeah.
are we okay, John? He says, yeah, no, just we're resetting something. And we finished rehearsal. I had no lighting. And so I go out to the control board, and there is John Richardson and two of his techs with the Kliegel Performer 2, which was the platform they operated the moving lights from. And they had soldering irons out. and they're in the board trying to, and
Jesus.
I saw my career pass before my
Oh
eyes.
my
I
God.
thought, I've put all of my eggs in this new basket, and it just became scrambled eggs. It's,
Wow.
but it turned out that someone backstage had accidentally taken an axe to the control snake, and so they
How do you accidentally axe the control snake? Like,
I don't know.
yeah, that's
The
crazy.
concept of the lights were not popular with the crew at the time, so
Oh,
I'm
oh,
not
I see.
making any accusations.
Yeah,
I don't.
yeah, I see. I see. I get it now.
But the snake was severed or damaged, and so they ran a
Wow.
new snake, and my career went
Ah, well,
on.
thank God. Thank God, because you did some stuff after that. So you've mentioned a bunch about Morpheus. Like, as I understand, you used Morpheus pretty exclusively until like around 1990
Very good.
when you moved
Wow.
over to Verilight.
Yeah.
And why was that?
Okay. So the way I was doing a I was doing a Good Morning America home base in Detroit, and I was lighting it. And the Steve Miller Band was in concert, and I decided to just go out and see the Steve Miller Band. And when I went out there, they had these amazing lights that were only available through Verilight, and they only did concert touring with them.
Right.
And so they'd never been used on television. Moving lights, were just an exclusive thing, and Verilight had their few clients, and that was it. And there was a lot of mystery surrounding Verilight. They used to have a thing where the technicians would be backstage working on it, and they'd have to shroud the
Yep.
technician
I
with like a
remember it.
blanket,
Yeah.
so you couldn't see how things worked inside this
Yeah.
mysterious box. Um, but this Steve Miller Band had all these moving lights, and they were Morpheus lights. They were Panaspots, and I went up to the guy, the operator, and said, these are amazing, and it's great to see there's an option besides Verilight because they won't rent and do television. And it was John Richardson, and he had this little company, and he had like 30 lights or something, and he was renting them to this one act. And so I said to him, I'd love to put these on television. Can we bring them by and show them to my producers? And he said, well, I have to wait for this tour to finish, and when it does, we'll come down there with a dozen of them. And
Ah,
that's how we ended up on Solid Gold, putting it, using them for the first time.
that's
And I
wild.
think the first live broadcast actually was the '83 Oscars, was the first time moving lights
Wow.
were ever used on live broadcast television. But
Huh. That's a great story. So
so I stuck with Morpheus. They supplied a good product, but then soon after I formed my own company, Full Flood, I had to do something down in Orlando, and it was New Kids on the Block, I believe, from um, from the Hollywood movie set, um, and the I did wanted to use Morpheus, and they were going to charge this huge number just to ship the stuff to Orlando, and it was one of my first shows of my using my own company, Full Flood, instead of being with another company, and I had a really tight budget, and but Verilight had just opened an office in Orlando. So I called up Verilight and said, can you supply these lights? And they said, yeah, whatever you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they jumped at the opportunity, and it turned out to be a very good marriage for a long
No
time
kidding. Wow,
with
what a good
Verilight.
move on their part and what a bad
Yeah.
move for Morpheus. I mean, honestly, and not to blow smoke up your skirt or anything, but imagine how the whole lighting scene might have been different had that not happened. That one little thing, not little, New Kids on the Block, but, had Morpheus continued just this astronomical growth with your shows alone, let alone all of the offshoots and the side things that would come from that. Um, I mean, what a difference that might have made.
It was the exposure to the industry that was about to become, as again I started designing using over the stage like 90% moving lights, and so it was a big design shift was occurring, and I was kind of, I think, in the forefront of that.
Yeah.
And I was suddenly doing, a lot of big shows, not only the Oscars, but the Grammys and the Kennedy Center Honors. And I was asked to do the Olympics in Atlanta. And so I was suddenly had a lot of big, meaty, high exposure shows. And the industry was watching.
Yeah.
And ironically, not only did other designers, but more importantly, producers and directors and the like were liking what they saw.
Yeah.
And that really started the big, I think, the big move towards automation in broadcast television,
Well,
live broadcast
to
television.
me, I wonder, might Morpheus have made the VL5, because I mean, if I just imagine the number of VL5s that you have used alone in your career, hundreds of thousands, I'm guessing, like hundreds of thousands of VL5s, because I can't even think of a Grammy show or a Academy Awards or something where there's not, a huge number of VL5s, right?
What was interesting about the VL5 was that at the time, Morpheus did have a thing called a Panabeam,
Yeah.
which was a parabolic reflector with a 650-watt peanut bulb in it, and then three scrollers in front. And so it could dim, it could change pan tilt, and it could mix. The three scrollers were primaries that could mix for to make pretty good color selections.
Yeah.
The crossfade was goofy, but they were as goofy with a lot of moving lights.
Yeah.
And I was really on to Verilight to, come up with something that's
Yeah.
an incandescent is great because of the it's gets to that color temperature that is a little more television friendly, and also the curve, the dimming curve was so beautiful on incandescent compared to the mechanical dimming on the of the high discharge lamps. Can you hold me 1 second? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the dimming curve was so beautiful from the from incandescent compared to the mechanical dimming of high discharge fixtures.
Yeah.
So Rusty Boucher, who was the CEO of Verilight at the time, um, really took it seriously, and they developed, I think, which is a really innovative instrument. And not only was it incandescent, which made it a little less expensive, and heat management was not nearly as big a problem, but they also had that big moon face,
Yeah.
and that filled so much volume over the top of the set. So even like Grammys or something, it's obvious that they could be reflective of the music and everything else, but it was that volume
Yeah.
of light that was overhead really became what was really intriguing. And
What about the
so,
color system, Bob? When you first saw it, was it a plus or a minus when you first saw the fan blades?
well, compared to the Panabeam with the mixing
Right.
scrollers, and um, they it was a real step up.
But it's such a
But
unique look. Like looking at the fixture, I remember the first time I saw them and I was like, well, that's weird. And since that time, I've really grown to love the look, obviously. But uh, yeah, I'm just curious what your first thought was when you looked at that and went, that's not going to work, or that really works, you know?
well, what I needed from them, from the very first ones I saw, was a way to frost them,
Mm,
to diffuse them. And they were able to add in the diffuser fins. And that's what made it really valuable for overhead for hokum, as we call it.
yeah.
That we had, this, when they frosted out, they just became this color source that was actually very gentle and didn't necessarily pollute, the stage. I mean, one of the difficult things to do, um, even with a non-television lighting designer, is how do you waste the light that you don't really, you like to see it in the air, but you don't have any place to put it on the ground.
Right.
And with shafts of light, that in particular, there's it's almost impossible to waste that light elegantly,
Yeah.
because you have talent that you have to get close-ups of, and if you have a bunch of shafts of light coming in, those shafts of light can pollute their face. And so um, it was, it's always difficult. Well, having a lot of volume overhead, but frosted meant that light became, it was very gentle by the time it hit the performance area, and didn't influence the everything the way that you know shafts of light would.
Yeah.
So that really, being able to have them overhead and have that volume is really attractive to me. And I'll be perfectly frank with you, they're a very inexpensive instrument
Yeah.
compared to a ellipsoidal instrument mover. They were like half the price.
Yeah.
So again, you could get a lot of volume and a lot of flexibility for not too much money.
Yeah.
And
What about control? Was that part of the deciding factor of moving over to Verilight? Like, did you immediately move into Artisan and eventually Virtuoso, or was that not a
well,
thing?
the Artisan was a digital um, format,
Yeah.
and that did create a kind of environment that was more responsive. And so queuing of music became a little easier
Right.
because the Morpheus equipment primarily was analog controlled.
Yeah.
And so it was, um, there were problems with the early Artisans as well.
Right.
they tend to be arbitrary at times, and it was more difficult to achieve what should be a very simple, command. It
Yeah.
just seemed to be extremely difficult to achieve at times. But um, overall, the especially since I'd moved over to Verilight, I had to learn to design around the Artisan and its restrictions or its
Yeah.
limitations.
Given the mass of what was going on at that time, these big shows that you were doing between like Solid Gold and Grammys and the things that you've mentioned, did Morpheus fight to get you back? Like, did they say we'll open an office in Orlando and we'll do all of these things? And probably it was just too late, I'm guessing.
Well, it was too late.
Yeah.
Um, you 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 kind of jump, and once you've jumped, it's difficult to go back.
Yeah.
And Morpheus was actually going through its own expansion and growth pains at the time,
Yeah.
and so they didn't have the as big an army of technicians and really qualified people to staff the shows.
Yeah.
A big tour goes out for 4 months. You can almost put inexperienced people onto it, and by the time they come off the tour, they're valuable, experienced
Yeah. They
people.
know what they're doing. Yeah.
And
Good point.
so Verilight was the king of touring at the time. So they tend to have uh, they were able to service the shows in regard to manpower,
Yeah.
as well as having a product that in many ways was superior.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was once I made the move, I stuck with Verilight,
Yeah.
and
Well,
yeah.
and as those counts got bigger and bigger on the shows, was that that budgets were growing, or were lights getting less expensive, or was it sort of a combination, a nice sort of molding of the two? Like how, because obviously you went from shows with 60 or 100 moving lights on it to 1,000 fairly rapidly.
Yeah. The uh, what happened in those days was, much to the chagrin of the production designers, is that producers were seeing more value out of investing in a lighting rig than investing in complex scenery or more scenery. So there was this migration of production budgets and dollars to from scenic elements to moving lights.
Interesting. Never heard it like that.
Also, if you're going to hang 2,000 pars, it takes X amount of man hours per par.
Hmm.
If you're going to hang 200 instruments instead of 2,000 pars, it takes less manpower.
Yeah.
So the rigs were going up. And so some of the manpower dollars also shifted into uh, being able to increase the gear size or rig size. Um,
And now it's all
and
shifting into video elements.
yeah, which is a
Yeah.
natural progression, right?
Yeah.
I mean, production producers see what makes a big difference
Yeah.
in the impact of their productions, and they get a lot of bang for their buck out of screens.
Yeah.
And so screens are really made a dramatic difference in uh, and probably the biggest shift since the introduction of moving lights.
Well,
So
and
there's a
I hate to shift gears because I want to hear more about this early Verilight stuff, but I do want to ask you a question related to screens because I've sort of seen, almost as divisive as our political scene in this country, is this idea of more screens, less screens, and obviously the extreme version of that is the Sphere in Las Vegas. And so I don't know if you've seen it live yet, but I'm sure you've probably seen some video if you haven't seen it live. You know, any opinions you'd care to share?
well, it what can happen with a tool like with screens is just like moving lights or too many choices being available um, to a lighting designer in the earlier periods, is that you with so much color and potential for movement and energy that it you can quickly overindulge.
Yeah.
And if you use every color and most of the movement gags in the first number, you've got no place else to go for the rest of
Yeah.
the show.
True.
And the same thing goes for screens. It's content discipline is something that is really hard to uh, to impose in the heat of the creative battle that producers want more and more and more. And sometimes our job is to say, no, you have to be more disciplined. Use less now so that when you do use it, it's important and
Yeah.
it makes a statement. And
Well, I wonder if in the sphere it's even expanded on that, because you've got someone saying, "Hey, I paid $2.3 billion for all this video stuff. Use it,"
yeah,
or
that's
whatever. Like,
exactly right.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly right. And
My personal opinion, which doesn't really matter because I'm by no means any kind of a designer or a creative person from that standpoint, but when I watch video of it, the first video I saw, it took me a while. Like, I'm talking 45 seconds to find Bono.
yeah,
He was singing,
yeah,
I could hear him, but I couldn't find him. Like, I'm looking everywhere in this video. And so when video elements take away that much from the artist that you're paying money to be there to see, like, to me, it's a planetarium with Bono standing on a tiny stage singing. That's kind of what I took away from it. Like,
well,
and
and the specificity of lighting, especially like Bono on
yeah,
stage, two, shafts of light from behind is backlight
yeah,
against dark is
yeah,
a dynamic look, and you know exactly where the singer is.
yeah,
Two shafts of light are saying, "Look here."
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
the shafts of light are completely blown out by that
lost.
kind of
Yeah,
video,
yeah,
and so that you don't have that kind of focus
yeah,
occurring
yeah.
unless it's built into the content. Yeah, Bono
Mm,
is going to disappear.
mm,
Um, I do productions like the Oscars, or where the for many reasons, not only at times is it better for the actual production, but it's also less expensive than building scenery. They'll rely on virtual scenery in the screens.
yeah,
Now, when the screens are integrated into the show, so they don't appear rigidly as a rectangular screen, but they're which outside television is occurring a lot. That
yeah,
they're and the technology's there where they can curve and they can sculpt and they have round, curved edges on screens. And
yeah,
so screens have come a long way, and so they can be integrated into scenic elements, so they're not appearing, as so much as predictable screens.
yeah.
But like on the Oscars, for instance, we uh, usually try, if screens are meant to be scenic elements, we try never to make a transition in front of the audience on the screen. So we don't want to go from Roman columns to uh, clouds in, as a dissolve on camera,
Ah, that's very interesting.
so that
Yeah,
the audience at home and hopefully the audience in the house don't understand that those columns are actually in a screen.
right. Yeah, I mean, just
And
like
that,
you wouldn't be changing set pieces during a show, with the lights on,
well, unless it's theatrically meant to come in
unless
or
it's
out or whatever.
unless it's part of
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
but the thing is, if what you believe are columns suddenly turn into clouds, busted.
yeah,
It's a screen.
yeah.
You're busted.
That's
And
such a
so
great point.
it's
Yeah.
it's that discipline of
Well,
not of waiting to do any kind of change like that
yeah.
discreetly, where the camera and the audience don't understand that it actually is a screen up there.
I'm sure you know Mark Brickman.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Mark was on my podcast, and we were talking about similar topic. Screens. He's not a fan of the overuse of LED screens now, and one of the examples he used was the Stones. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, probably just prior to COVID, or maybe just after COVID. I don't know, a couple years ago, when they had like the four big iPhones up above the stadium
Mm-hmm.
tour, and they had these four big iPhone screens, right? And he said, they were cool, but I couldn't see Mick Jagger. It made Mick Jagger look
Mm-hmm.
small. It
Mm-hmm.
made Mick Jagger look tiny on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
That's what those screens did. And he's right. I mean, you know, people aren't paying a huge amount of money to go there and watch a movie. They're paying to go there and watch Mick Jagger. You know, they want to see him jumping around on the stage.
Yeah, but
So,
because they're selling out in those large venues,
yeah,
they don't. They're too far away to see Mick Jagger's face.
if it's
So
IMAG, it's a
you
different
do
thing.
need,
Yeah.
yeah, you do need IMAG and that kind of video reinforcement.
But
Um,
I'm talking about, you know, videos playing on those
yeah,
screens,
yeah,
not IMAG. And you know, IMAG I understand. Like IMAG, I was always for IMAG. We've always had it. You know, we had the screens, you know, with the rear projection, big Barco projectors and stuff.
sure, yeah.
And you know, way back. But you know, you needed it because the venues were getting larger and larger, and people were still paying reasonable prices for those tickets way at the back, and they wanted to be able to see, right? So you know, I get it. And actually I saw Pink Floyd in sometime in the 90s, Division Bell tour, I think it was. And that was in a stadium, and guess what? They had IMAG screens, but again, they were only used for IMAG. They weren't taking away from the show or this huge show element. They were just used for IMAG.
You
So
know, speaking of Pink Floyd, though, that's a great example of a big stadium show, The Wall, which was one of the first of the touring
unbelievable.
stadium shows ever, I think.
Yeah.
But they built a show in front of the audience. Actually, they built a show that competed with or was justified by the scale of the venues they were in.
Yeah.
But they didn't have IMAG,
Yeah.
and so the way it was lit at all times, you always knew where the brightest thing was.
Yeah.
Were
That's true.
were the band,
Yeah.
and everything else intensity wise was 2 or 3 steps down from the
Yeah.
band's illumination.
Yeah,
So
you could easily locate the four brightest
there
blobs
you go. There you
on
go.
the stage a mile away from you. Yeah. No, I
But
mean
when
Michael Jackson, same thing. Like Michael Jackson, I saw with Peter Morse in Eastern Europe. It was in Czech Republic, in Prague, for the opening of a big world tour or whatever. And it was the same thing. I mean, there was 150,000 people there in this huge field, and front of house had to be a quarter of a mile away from the stage. And, you know, again, IMAG was necessary. You had to have it, but it was so well done that it didn't take away from the show. It just amplified it. Like it showed you what was going on the stage if you couldn't see what was going on the stage, right? So, yeah, anyways, I mean, it's a pet peeve of mine because I have so many designer friends of mine who have come to me and said, "Have you seen the U2 thing? It's mind blowing. It just completely blew me away." And I have a high degree of respect for what was done there, you know, just for the enormity of it all, that the size of that project and the technology that it encompasses and stuff. But I just don't like it. Like, you know, for me, I don't want to see a concert there. I'm sorry. I
it's
just
all
don't want
about
to.
use, it's all
Yeah.
about discipline. It
Yeah.
gets back to you trying to get your producers to calm down. You're going to see red eventually. You're just not going to see it in every single song.
Yeah.
And
True.
that getting getting producers to underuse or to use the technology so at when you decide to explode it big, it's meaningful. It
Yeah.
is a star for a moment of the show.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but if it's constantly just vomiting out imagery and illumination and everything else, it's numbing.
Yeah.
There's
Agreed.
no
Completely.
the audience. It just becomes, it's just standard operating procedure to have something happening bright and dazzling at all
All the
times.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
It's on 11 all the time. Yeah.
yeah, and so
So back to the whole Verilight discussion. I mean, it brings up an interesting point because I think like one of the things that was kind of driven home in that situation is how important relationships are. And obviously you had a good relationship with Morpheus, but they didn't take that show seriously enough and they lost a gazillion-dollar client over it. And it's funny because there's a similar story, much much smaller, but Chaz Harrington, lighting designer, who at the time was working with Dire Straits, and contacted Verilight, and I think it was Wiseman at the time. Maybe Wiseman swears it wasn't him, but whoever it was at Verilight, he contacted him and said, "Hey, I've got this, this band called Dire Straits that I'm bringing over to the U.S. and we need some lights." And they pretty much blew him off. Like, nah, we
Yeah.
don't really have anything we can give you, So
Small time. You know.
he met this little company called High End Systems, and High End Systems had this new light that they had just started making called the IntelliBeam, and it had never been used on a tour. They never even thought to use it on a tour. It was a club light, right? And he said, I think I can make this work, and convinced them to cut him a deal for whatever it was, 24 of them or something. And look what happened. I mean, an industry became from that one light, from that one little event. And I think, actually, I don't think it was John, because I think John told me that he tried to go back and sweep up that situation and stop the bleeding, when High End just started exploding at the time. And it was too late. The cat was out of the bag. That you could use something else that you could actually own, and make profit on and stuff like that. So, but yeah, relationships, obviously, especially in the early days, like today, it's probably a little bit different, I think, because there's so many options out there and they're all great. Like, that's one of the cool things. I think lighting designers are spoiled today because there's 10 or 12 brands in the automated lighting industry that all make unbelievable lights. They're all very similar and they're all very good,
Yeah.
like
And they're
parts aren't falling
dependable,
out, and
and
yeah, and they're weatherproof, and
yeah.
it's just incredible the tools that you guys have available to you now. So yeah, the Verilight relationship obviously went a long time and was extremely successful. Do you still use incandescent VL5s today, or have you gone fully LED?
I think they've gone to the scrap heap. I think
Yeah,
they've been retired. Um, that's fine. The LED does the same thing. It's still a big moon face up there to
yeah,
occupy a lot of volume, and it's not that expensive to rent.
yeah.
And so, yeah,
They've gone back and converted the incandescents to LED though too,
I
haven't
think
they?
they did.
Yeah, just
I
recently,
see,
like last
I
year
see
or something.
the hardware looks kind of battered and old out there, but when it goes up there, it behaves like an LED. So
You've
yeah,
probably
I
got
think.
your initials scratched into some, BD, 1991 or something. Yeah. But no, it's interesting, and so, like, what is your sort of brand du jour today? Is it still, like, if you were to go out, and I know you're going to talk about it a little bit more. I know you're not doing as much now, but recently, let's call it, if you were going to go out and do a big show, a Grammy show, or even a Olympic opening or closing ceremony or something, what would you spec on it?
I'm no longer brand specific.
Ah,
I don't. I'm not tied to a manufacturer or a brand, um, and I'm just looking for what is going to give me the best result, for this. And there's so many options out there, and the equipment has, as you just mentioned, it's become dependable, and there's so much flexibility in a single instrument can change its personality so
it's
quickly.
crazy. Yeah.
It is crazy, and
Yeah.
so
And how
it
bright the LEDs have gotten
oh,
too. Like, it's
I
crazy.
mean, I still do not understand, um, because what makes a light controllable is the smaller the light source and the brighter the light source, the more controllable it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so uh, a in the old days, a carbon arc movie projector was the only source to use in a film projector because it had this little tiny source that light could be collected, but because it was so small, it also could be controlled.
Yeah.
And so that's why incandescent moving lights as ellipsoidals never really worked.
Yeah.
They just were too mushy, and also it's hot, and it just never worked.
Yeah.
But it's that large light source was also, the filament is just so huge
Yeah.
that it's hard to collect the light and control it.
Yeah.
I mean, Lecos do it very nicely, but
Yeah.
it's just really hard to do it. And so the high discharge instruments, had a little tiny light source. It was a discharge.
Yeah.
And when LEDs first were being introduced, how do you make a single little flat light source that controllable? And I really never thought they would get to the point where we could have really ferocious long distance ellipsoidal moving lights that are LED.
Yeah.
But
It really
they
is. It really is impressive. Yeah.
phenomenal,
Like to a point
phenomenal.
where, some, who was it I was talking to recently on a podcast? I think it was Robert Roth, who said part of the problem is like everything's getting too bright. Like not everything needs to be a stadium light, like how about some, you know, 25, 30-foot trim lights are designed again, not everything needs to be the equivalent of a 2000-watt discharge lamp or whatever. And he's right about that too. I mean, you need options, right?
Well, uh, when the VL5 was first introduced, my friend Ken Billington, who's a Broadway, excuse me one second again.
Yep.
I'm sorry,
It's all
have
good.
the Santa Anas are blowing in California.
Yeah.
Everything's so dry.
Yeah.
Um, so the
Ken Billington. Yeah.
instrumentation uh, uh, was not used on Broadway, and Ken Billington, who actually I think introduced moving lights into Broadway when he used six, I think they were Panaspots on Chicago. Later
Yeah.
on, they got moved to Vera lights, but it was the first time anyone, and again, your audio uh, your audio patrons will agree that especially the early moving lights, the fans were so noisy and
Yeah.
the frequency of the fans were so high
Yeah.
that it really made for uh, yeah, they're very, very difficult to use, especially in a Broadway environment where there's a lot of quiet time
Yeah.
and you have this like constant high pitched roar coming from overhead.
Yeah, I was one of the
Um,
fortunate souls who got to try to sell moving lights onto Broadway in the earliest days, and it was never that easy, It was always, there was a couple of things like the nuances of the movement, and especially at Martin, like if you wanted to program, and I'm pointing at the bottom left corner to the top right corner, and you just wanted a line to go slowly from the bottom right to the top left. Um, Martin couldn't do it.
no,
It was like
no.
it would either zigzag or it would go up on the way there and down on the way back. And so that was one of the big problems. Fan noise was a big problem. Um, Color changes had to be so subtle and soft and beautiful. And sometimes that wasn't the case. You could see other colors in between the fades and stuff. And so, yeah, it was always so challenging to try to sell to Ken Billington and a lot of the other, very talented, amazing Broadway designers that just, wanted it a certain way, right? And we couldn't do it.
And that's where the BM5 actually had a good Broadway run
Yeah.
because it was a silent
Yeah.
moving light.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't as controllable and it
Yeah.
was not, definitely could not, it was not a profile instrument.
Yeah.
But they did a lot of a lot of good work on the stage,
It did what it did really, really well.
really,
Yeah.
really well
Yeah.
and really quietly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was popular
Yeah.
from that perspective.
I would say the
Uh,
VL5 and IntelliBeam are probably the two most successful moving lights ever in the history of moving lights. You know, just both of them would never die. Like the
yeah,
IntelliBeam went as sort of the hottest thing for like, I don't know, 12, 15 years, which is an eternity in moving light years, right? And VL5 even longer than that. So,
and
yeah,
how dependable. That's
yeah,
the other thing is, yeah, the VL5 turned out to be a moving instrument with not too many moving parts.
yeah,
And it made it into a very dependable instrument.
yeah,
And not only was it an affordable instrument, but it also was there. Like we say, there are VL5s that were 5 years ago were from the first 5 years of the VL5 production runs.
yeah, yeah,
They lasted like 30 years.
yeah,
So yeah, they're very successful instrument,
yeah.
but very limited in its application.
So, Bob, to go back to your like early days, I think you were born in the UK,
Yep.
and I think you stopped off somewhere and made your way into California. Um, what got you thinking lighting? Like, at what point in your life did you decide this seems like a cool direction to go?
I got a job cleaning cable, and I wanted to work in the entertainment motion picture industry somehow. I didn't
Yeah.
know how, and I got a job a um, at a vendor cleaning cable,
Huh.
and I got paid $2 an hour, and it was 50 years ago,
Yeah.
and that turned out to be a really good connection for me, and I fortunately, through the help of a gaffer that worked a lot from out of the shop that I was working in, a place called Cinemobile, Doug Pentek got me um, a call with the union to work at Universal on the rigging crew there, and so I started working at Universal, and their Universal at the time was this big machine just pushing out Banachek and Kojak and all these different
Right. Yeah.
episodics. And they had 20, 30 different crews shooting at any given time. There was just
A
fantastic.
lot going on.
And so I started work there, but work was tedious. I
Mm.
don't know if you've ever worked in film, but
No. No, I haven't.
it's a lot of hurry up and wait,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of yeah. It's so um, then Carl Gibson, who's a lighting director who came from NBC and had started his own company, Academy Lighting, came to Universal to shoot a little variety show in the back lot, and I got assigned the to be the Universal uh, best boy on the project, and I loved it. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, we were lighting things, but it was happening rapid fire, and we were interpreting music, and it just was like really. I I responded to it.
Hmm.
So I decided to leave Universal and go to work for Carl's company called Academy Lighting. And this was in 1975.
Wow.
And I worked at Academy Lighting for for a few years. And not too long after I started to work for Academy Lighting as a sort of a staff gaffer, I started getting little projects as a lighting designer on my own. And through a very fortunate incident, suddenly I had been the gaffer on Don Kirshner's rock concert for Jeff Engel, who is the lighting designer. But something happened, and Jeff could not do next week's
Okay.
week's
Yep.
production, and so Lou Horvitz, who is the director, said, "Well, let's let Bob be the LD." And so I had been, lighting interviews for the BBC and stuff. I had
Yeah.
nothing real, and suddenly this like music show, I this director is giving me a chance to be the LD for a week on,
Wow. Yeah. That's cool.
and so I called Lou up and I said, Lou, what would really be cool is if we could talk them into building a scaffold upstage, and I got 2 backlight follow spots, and we put some smoke in the air, because then we'd see these shafts of light moving around with the performer. And so Lou said, "Okay, I'll talk them into it," and they did. They rented 2 extra follow spots, 2 operators, and they built the scaffold to put the follow spots on. Well, it was like the show went from being a typical network looking kind of safe 3-color changes kind of production into this rock concert, because these backlight follow spots were following around,
That's wild.
and yeah,
So
and
what made
so
you think of that though? That was pretty cutting edge at that point, I guess, right?
it was, but it seemed obvious to me that
That's awesome.
this is good money for a producer to spend.
Yeah.
We're going to add something really dynamic.
You faked moving lights.
Yeah. And so then Lou called me after in 1980. And I'm still not 30 years old. I mean, I'm in my mid to late 20s, and Lou calls me and says, I've got this new series I want you to come over and do. Now, if you do it, they're not going to let you do Don Kirshner's rock concert anymore. You're going to be off that. But it's called Solid Gold, and it's a Top of the Pops kind of show. And so I thought, okay. And he said, you'll put smoke in the air and we'll get backlight follow spots. And I said, yeah, that's fine. But and I did. I got the show, and I basically, it was this amazing experience because the producers didn't really care what I did.
Hmm.
It just had to happen on time.
Yeah.
It was like, you want to make it green, you want to make it, do this, you want to, as long as it doesn't cost any more money, then we're good to go with it.
You had already
They didn't have it.
developed that much trust and respect. I mean, that's pretty impressive. That's cool.
Well, and I think what it was is that I brought a lot to their table, because they were the producers and were used to doing things in an old network kind of thing, where
Right.
big filament instruments, 10Ks and 5Ks, which I, by the way, did inherit on Solid Gold. I had to use 10Ks and 5Ks, but color was a real commodity that you rarely saw except on a psych. Because it's just really expensive to have color on a set.
Why is
and
that?
especially, well, just you have these big 10Ks and 5Ks, you put a gel in front of it. Now that thing is focused once, and that's all it's going to do. It's going to be the red backlight, or it's going to be the blue backlight. And so you need a lot of instrumentation, and they're big, heavy, expensive to rig instruments.
Yeah.
And so color was something that was hard to come by,
Interesting. Yeah.
except for on a psych. Psychs are built for color, but
Yeah.
they, other than that, yes, color was used, but it wasn't as accessible and instantaneous. And so I was able on Solid Gold, when I started the show, it was at Studio 6 at KTLA, which is the old Warner Brothers studio from the 1920s. and we were on stage 6, and it came with 1,500 lights, all 5Ks, 10Ks, whatever was in the air, I got to use. So I was able to put in a bunch of 10Ks with the over every area of the stage. I had a yellow, I had a red, and I had a blue, and sometimes I had a white. And
Wow.
so I was able to have a lot of color authority over a big, big set. And I think that made them enthusiastic about what I was doing. The fact that it was such large scale color, but it was at a huge cost. I mean, gosh, the amount of labor and
Do you remember the
gel.
first act you lit on Solid Gold?
I do not, to be honest with
No.
you. I
Wow.
think it was, um, yeah, no, that's a good question.
Some
No, I
pop
don't.
diva.
But anyway, yeah, Dionne Warwick was the first year was the host of that show.
Yeah.
But what happened was is they liked what they saw, and it wasn't costing them any more money. So as long as I didn't hold up production, I could do whatever I like,
Hmm.
and I did. I you I used high contrast and I did things in at the time was quite unorthodox for broadcast television,
Hmm.
and so I got a lot of the producers liked what I was doing, and then when I brought in those, as we mentioned before, those 12 Pana spots for Dolly Parton, um, that was it. They were completely sold. They spent a lot of extra money getting in a lot of Pana spots over shortly after that, and the show became actually known even with the acts as a place where they could go on television and look more like a concert, which is the look they always were trying to
Interesting.
achieve.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
that's cool. I
so
mean, it's so wild because when you think about it now, you're like, really? Like a dozen moving lights changed things that much or whatever, but it's true. So how'd
yeah,
you go from what bridged you from Solid Gold to all the Grammys, all the Oscars, all these, like what escalated things? What made things, or was it
I
just a slow progression that you just kept working?
well, no, I was getting a lot of attention,
Yeah.
without question, because Solid Gold was becoming. I mean, producers and directors that did live television or big variety specials were coming by the studio to look at the lighting when we were
You
taping.
won an Emmy, didn't you? For
Yes, I
Solid
did.
Gold? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
actually got nominated um, for and lost the first year, but the second year I was nominated. I did get an Emmy for Solid Gold,
Wow.
and
That's cool. That helps, I guess. That probably helps your resume along when you're lighting,
yeah.
big televised events or
Well,
television.
but it's also Solid Gold was a syndicated show, and at the time it
Yeah.
was the network
It's a big
world,
deal. Yeah.
and so to get a that kind of accolade from doing a syndicated show was extremely rare. Um, but yeah, it went very quickly where uh, and so like I say, and I introduced the moving lights and on for Dolly Parton on Solid Gold, and shortly after that, Roy Christopher, who was a production designer for the Oscars, he did it. He and Ray Clausen would switch back and forth doing the production design for the Oscars. They asked him to do the Oscars, and he refused to do it. He said, "No, I can't go in there and do it again and not have a real lighting designer." And so the director at the time, Marty Pasetta, uh, I'd been doing a bunch of work for Marty, mainly because I could, being younger, I would tolerate his screaming.
Mhm.
but, um, Marty said, "Well, we'll bring Dickinson in," and so I get this call from Marty saying, "Dickinson, you're going to do the Oscars. You better not fuck it up."
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, this is great. Why not? I'll do the Oscars. I never told Marty. I never told anyone
Uh-oh.
that I'd actually never lit a live broadcast. I
No.
had everything I had done, all the work I had done, had been for tape.
Oh, wow.
And so we
Well,
were
they didn't
used
ask.
to. They
They didn't
didn't
ask.
ask.
You know, what are you supposed to do? I mean, I didn't
And
know that
so,
mattered.
so getting back to my earlier story about the snake being violated on my very first,
Right, right.
here
Yeah.
I'd risked everything on this technology.
Wow.
And but
That's
yeah,
wild. That's wild. So you got your first one and then just got the call every year, or how did that
it
work? Like,
started. Yeah,
you didn't
yeah,
sign like a
and
40-year deal or anything, did you? You
no,
just kept getting the call.
no, and it was always year to year, and it still is. I mean, in truth, you just.
When do you
But
get the call? Like,
yeah, I do. I
no,
do.
when do you get the call? Like, the show
Uh,
is when, and you get the call how much before that?
I've been asked to do next year's Oscars, so
No, but what I'm saying is, like, I don't know what month the Oscars is. Is it
it's in
March?
March
Yeah.
usually. Yeah,
So let's say the Oscars is in March. In most years, when do you actually get the call saying,
I'd
you
say
know,
the August before.
oh, really? That much
Yeah,
notice?
yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It, but yeah, it it took off from there, from the Oscars and the introduction of the moving lights on a large scale on television started to make this big difference
Yeah.
in the look of television. I
Yeah.
mean, of entertainment television. Um, it it really took off, and by the early '90s, um, like I say, we were installing rigs that were almost exclusively moving lights over the stage. So,
Interesting.
um, yeah, yeah.
That's so cool. I mean, really, uh, I mean, other than you right now, well, I guess Barnhart still does some stuff, and uh, but I'm trying to think of who does award shows besides you. You know, Tom Kenny does a couple, I think. But yeah, I mean, you've done all the big award shows almost.
Yeah, I mean, I must tell you that there's some really good work being done out there, though.
Yeah,
Noah Mitz,
yeah,
who does the Grammys now
yeah,
and does all of AGT and that franchise, and um, Noah Mitz is really doing good work.
yeah,
Um, yeah, there's an interesting thing because yeah, over the years, Bob Barnhart obviously is someone who started work with me as a gaffer,
yeah,
and um, eventually ended up developing his own career as an LD that has been deserved. You know, he
yeah,
did a good job.
yeah,
Um, but lighting is kind of an interesting thing. It's there's a lot you have to learn, and you do need a certain technical foundation. But then there is this other part that has to do with what is your reaction, to the content, to the environment, to the, whether the message is a song or it's a moment in a production like an award show where something serious is being talked about on set. How do you interpret that?
yeah.
And
It's
that's the part
interpretation.
that you
Exactly.
really can't teach.
Yeah.
That's a part that you just, your reaction into the music or to the moment um, is something that is integral to each of us individually.
It's such a great point, and like, for example, Metallica now is Rob Koenig, and he does a remarkable job. It's an unbelievable show, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's crazy. But I've been friends with John Broderick for 100 years, And so I'm constantly seeing Metallica and comparing things, the same song, like the interpretation from Koenig versus Broderick. And some I like one guy, some I like the other guy, and it's funny, because really two people can light the exact same act with the exact same set list and make a completely different show. And I know it sounds, pretty elementary, but to me, it really is down to how you interpret the music and the audience and, whatever, the
The
mood you're trying to create.
yeah, I mean, there is that, and there was a time where acts or producers looked to the LD for their interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted you to just bring it to them, present it, and it made it a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And over the years, though, there's a larger and larger committee, there seems, at any given time,
Yeah.
with opinions
Yeah.
about how it should be.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to stand your ground to those committees
Yeah.
that they're, whether they're producers, directors, or representatives of an act or whatever. They all come with these opinions about what they think you should be doing with the music or the product.
Yeah.
And
Well, I remember in Taylor Swift's really early days, a designer friend of mine, and I won't say who it was because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but said to me, there are divas like Madonna and, like some of these artists who are divas and they're very difficult to work with and very opinionated and stuff. Taylor Swift is on a different level. And I said, why? She's a young girl. She seems to have some nice pop songs and stuff. But her mother, I guess, at least in the early days, I don't know if it's still today, but her mother was smarter than the lighting person, at lighting, smarter than the audio engineer with audio, smarter than the set guys, like she just knew everything and was extremely opinionated and was involved in a lot of those discussions and made the act very undesirable to work with, because of that. And so, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like they're starting to add more and more, artistic directors and musical directors and all these different people that are close to the artist who are in the artist's ear. And therefore, they're able to go out and dictate how they want things to look.
There's a Taylor Swift mom, so to speak, on almost every production now.
There? Yeah.
There's just somebody who knows better or wants to superimpose their concept on it.
Well,
and I understand, but
yeah. Wiseman always tells me about Beyonce's mom because Wiseman works a lot with Beyonce, but he says she's amazing. The mom is amazing, and doesn't tell people how she wants the lighting to look and stuff. She just negotiates the deal, makes sure that the right people and things are in place and stuff. But she doesn't tell you how to do your job. Supposedly.
Beyonce's a different kind of act from my perspective, in that she might bring in an LD and a production designer and a whatever. But when it comes down to it, she wants to see you, me. She wants to understand, and she knows what I bring to the table. And so she goes directly to people that she senses are going to have the best control or outcome for her.
Yeah.
But so many others are just surrounded by bewildering staffs, a huge quantity of people.
Yeah.
And like I say, they all have an opinion about how I should do my job.
Yeah.
And
so back to gear. When did you start to venture out of VL products, or venture into at least accepting some non-VL products?
It was Martin. Martin was the one that made that leap for us. Um, they started because they had a product that could be purchased by vendors. Suddenly, these vendors that were the manufacturer and the vendor,
Mm-hmm.
like Morpheus and Verilight,
Yeah.
sort of had a chokehold on the industry. And all of a sudden, a for sale moving light that was somewhat dependable and was bright. That was
Is
the
that the
one
Mac
thing.
2000?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was like they were
Yeah.
just so bright compared
Yeah.
to anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And they had their problems for sure. But
They were
that
generally pretty reliable. They were very inexpensive compared to other things, especially compared to now.
one of the first ones you could buy that were meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were, you could get them mirrored, movers and things so you could purchase. But
Yeah.
to have an actual head that was swinging around up there, it was the first reliable, bright,
Yeah.
and purchasable
Yeah.
uh, um, instrument.
Yes. So you started using a lot of those.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
they were, especially as they had some color interpretation problems. They had, they had their problems, but they they made for a really good workhorse
Yeah.
because they had some flexibility. And
So
yeah,
that was your spot, and the VL5 was your wash still.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm, for a long time.
Yeah.
And um, Martin also were at the time listened.
Yeah.
They wanted to know what it was that we were looking for and what could they do for their next product here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So then, when did you start venturing into LED and taking LED source products seriously?
to be honest with you, I think it's in the last 8 years or so that LED products was outside of a wash light.
Yeah.
They obviously,
Yeah.
uh,
The pancake washes, basically, right?
yeah, I
Like
mean,
the Aura and that kind of stuff.
yeah, but as a actual controllable instrument, um, they the bulbs and or the light source, I should say, not the
Yeah.
bulb, um, started to become brighter and more controllable, and it it just was at a point where the LED light source was as efficient and as bright and controllable as a high discharge light.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the difference other than the color temperature actually was more dependable.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were lots, especially it's not as bad now, but as we remember in the early days of LEDs, um, you could get a chip that uh, 1 year and then 2 years later go to replace that chip and it's a different color signature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
binning got a lot better. They in the LED world, they call that binning. And
mm-hmm,
generally the cheaper the LED chips cost, the worse the binning is on those
mm-hmm,
LEDs. And binning is just really how tight your tolerances are on color.
right.
And so, for some things like lights that are going in parking garages and stuff, that's not very important. But when you get down to lighting television shows and stuff like that, binning becomes a huge importance. And also, the phosphor that they're using to coat the LEDs and all kinds of other things. Like one of the things people used to think, I remember at one point, people would think there's LED, there's incandescent, there's discharge, and those are all like all LEDs are LEDs. They're all the same basically. And there's such a huge difference from
Yeah.
a good LED chip to a bad LED chip. And I used to have a company in the LED business, in the commercial LED business. And I learned more than I needed to learn about LEDs, but just a massive difference between good and bad LED stuff. So, one of the things I've always been curious about is, so a band is out touring. Let's say it's Beyonce, for example, and she's got her LD and design and everything, and then suddenly they're going to be headlining or performing on a huge television show like the Grammys or an HBO shoot or something, and they bring in Bob Dickinson uh, for that show. So, what are some of the things that you're being hired to evolve that show or to change that show? I mean, is it really just to add a bunch more white light so that the cameras like it, or I know it's probably a heck of a lot more complicated than that.
You know, an irony is uh, television cameras are basically more sensitive, or can be more sensitive than even the human eye.
Yeah.
Although the human eye is an amazing tool, um, but the LED cameras are not hungry for vast amounts of light.
Mm-hmm.
They're, I'm sorry, modern chip cameras are not as hungry for high intensity. What they do lack is tolerance of intensity differences. In other words, your eye can see, light ratios of 1,000 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you have an amazing amount of ability from your eye. Um, Cameras have a ratio it's more like 30 to 1, and so we have to compress the brightest and the dimmest have to get a lot closer on television than they do to the human eye.
I see.
The downside for, like, if you're the Grammys, for instance, it's in a big arena, and in a big arena, if you go see Taylor Swift, they're going to light her so that she sticks out to the audience in the house. There's no question where Taylor is, and
Yeah.
that's done by intensity usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's focus, backlights, and intensity. Help guide us to where the performer is. In television, we can't have that huge ratio. We can't light Taylor Swift at 300-foot candles and have the dancers next to her at 20-foot candles. We have to narrow that down. And it kind of makes for this visually to the live audience, it makes this overly homogenized environment, where we're actually suddenly taking Taylor Swift, using Taylor's example, but we're only going to light her at 30 or 40-foot candles, and the dancer next to her is going to be at 15 or 20-foot candles. She's going to appear on television a lot brighter than her dancer, but to the audience, unfortunately, that's watching the broadcast, it is rather homogenized. Taylor does not going to pop out nearly as much. And that is a sacrifice we have to make because of the limitations of the contrast ratios of television.
Interesting.
Cameras are a lot better. They can put up with an awful lot of, when I started way back when, in the days of solid gold and the like, they were tube cameras. There were actually 3 tube cameras, 3 tubes in a camera and a prism, and it would split the light into and stimulate one of the camera tubes, and that's how I interpreted color. Those tubes could get burned if a light was too bright. It would actually burn the coating on the tube, and they're rather expensive. So they one of the tubes was like they're like $8,000, which is a lot of money. And there are 3 of them, and a single light cube could destroy those 3 tubes.
Wow.
So there was a lot of, we had to homogenize everything and be very, very careful. Now, of course, with chip cameras, we don't have to worry about that so much, but and it does allow us to be creatively. We can do things that are completely like. The last time I did the Grammys before Noah took over, Kendrick Lamar was opening the show, and he came in with a whole group of people that had all these opinions about how to do the music. And instead, I decided that what would be really appropriate would be to sidelight him, but with so much light where he goes in the clipper so that he almost is disappearing. You couldn't really make out, and the cameras can handle that. They can you can overexpose something, and it still does not um, make it impossible to make a good image out of it.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, cameras have come a long way, just like lighting, and their potential and their contrast ratios are a lot broader than they used to be.
I've never heard that explanation. I mean, it's an excellent explanation. I understand it so much better now. What that whole compressing things down concept. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's wild. Um, you mentioned, I think when we were talking before we started recording, that you're slowing it down a little bit or
Yeah,
completely. So what's that all about? Are you stopping? Have you stopped?
I want to do I mean, I'd like to do projects that I find nourishing.
Yeah.
And for me, like the Oscars is a great production to be involved with because they have the amount of time to manicure almost all the visual moments throughout the show.
Mm-hmm.
And the schedules, part of the problem with what happened with moving lights and the introduction of moving lights is that schedules became a lot faster because we no longer had the dreaded ladder.
Mm.
In other words, the performer comes out, hits a mark, and the director needs to change that mark 10 feet to the stage left or whatever. Um, Before moving lights, you had to go out there with a ladder and three people
Yeah.
and pan the light over and wrench
Yeah.
it off, and now you can move on with rehearsal.
Yeah.
Well, automation did away with that,
Yeah. Yeah.
so things got a lot faster, and now they're really rapid fire. I mean, we just don't have the opportunity, unfortunately, because the technology can move at a very rapid pace. It does not necessarily mean the decisions have been fully thought out for any given moment.
So you don't have those pauses where you get to sort
That's
of
right.
change your thinking on the next thing that's going to happen or whatever. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
makes
and
sense.
again, on a production like the Grammys, it used to be that you would bring out the Rolling Stones and they would rehearse. You They would run it maybe three times and whatever else, and then they would break down everything, the scenery, and start setting up for another band. During that time, we got time to manicure our cues, to
Mm.
make them all of our mistakes. We could review the tape and kind of be indulgent and creative, and we did a lot of our creative work after a, a rehearsal.
Mm.
Um, but then on the Grammys, which was the first show to do this, um, they introduced two stages. So what happened in rehearsals was they'd finish rehearsing on one side and they're setting up on another side. And the minute you finish rehearsal on one side, they'd open up the other side and start rehearsing over there.
Mm.
So we had no time to manicure our cues, to
Mm.
really, we didn't have any time that was not where we weren't actually had a rehearsal going on.
Interesting.
And so all of that has made for a lot of compromise.
Yeah.
And that compromise is started to wear on me.
Mm.
And so again, getting back to like the Oscars,
Yeah.
that's a production that still has the kind of schedule and desire to manicure things. And so we get a lot of time.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. What about we never talked about some of the big productions that you've done, like these Olympic opening and closing ceremonies, which tend to be, I know the biggest moving light rentals every year or every 4 years, anyways. Uh, did you do Beijing?
No, I did not.
Okay.
No.
But you've done a bunch of them. Like I was looking
Hmm.
at the list here, and are those difficult, easy, strange? Like I would guess there's all kinds of
I love them. I
yeah.
love them again because they involve a lot of collaboration goes on. You've got a lot of creative producers who have ideas and concepts, and but there's time usually to manicure and to sculpt them correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of, I think, my best work ever has been in those impossible circumstances. And again, you're attempting to throw light well beyond the design usually of a moving light,
Yeah.
especially because the
Yeah.
moving light's really thinking it's got to throw its light the maximum of 125 feet or something, 100 feet.
Yeah.
Whereas all of a sudden in these huge venues, you might be throwing light 1,000 feet,
Yeah.
and that very few instruments can do that and maintaining level of control.
Yeah.
So doing those large projects like that, you have the time to really work on it and how to, and you collaborate a lot, which is fun.
Yeah.
It's very rewarding.
You did the
But
Vancouver one, right?
hmm,
You did Vancouver, I think.
I did Vancouver,
Yeah,
which was very interesting.
I'm Canadian. I'm from Western Canada, and one of the things that was so cool about the Vancouver Olympics was how financially successful the Vancouver Olympics was for the city of Vancouver. Like usually cities just lose piles of
Yeah,
money
yeah,
putting on the Olympics, and Vancouver made money on it. And it was just such a wild success. And, culturally, they managed to really, through the shows that were created and a lot of the things that happened, they were able to, bring in all this Inuit culture and all this other stuff. I mean, it was really cool. I thought the whole thing was so well done, including the opening and closing. Uh,
yeah. Ironically, there's an example of uh, contrast ratio and light levels for large venues being a real crisis.
mm,
And what happened was David Atkins, who produced and creative director of the Vancouver Olympics, um, decided he wanted to try large scale projection. And it really, in 2010, it was not something that was common or being used that much, super large scale projection.
mm-hmm.
And but David had a company that was able to do, because again, that unfortunately that stadium was supposed to have a new roof on it, and it had an inflatable roof, and it was supposed to, as part of the Olympics, they're supposed to make it into a hard roof, and whatever happened, they dropped the ball and it didn't get completed in time. So we
Mm.
had an inflatable roof, and you couldn't put very much load on the roof at all. Plus, from a lighting perspective, whatever you put up there, the roof actually breathed, and so it could go 5 feet in one direction,
Oh,
and
Jesus. That's real
and
good for
so
focusing,
yeah,
huh?
yeah, no, it's so we had very oblique angles on that surface, the Mondo surface, that which was basically this white cloth.
Yeah.
It's like, and so but David got a company that used computer blending so they could have all these various sources and blend them into one image. So you might have 30 projectors, but they're all blended into one single image. And the entire, what would be the ice or grass level of the stadium, um, was covered with projection cloth.
Ah,
So he put a lot into that concept. And as we started to rehearse, it was so difficult for lighting. First of all, if you have a bunch of dancers that are dancing on in the middle of a cornfield, if you light the dancers, you also light up the white cloth, and so the cornfield goes away. Um, and so I actually, David worked with me on this, in that he dropped down these big pits around the perimeter of the grass, and I was able to drop the lights down right to the level of the surface of the projection surface, and so I could light the dancers by shooting light that was at surface level, so the waste light was not down onto the surface of the. It instead was shooting off, unfortunately, into the audience, or a lot of the audience, but the projection was preserved. Well, it all worked really well. I mean, my cross light being set down low turned out to be a fantastic, and I even had follow spots down there, so I could light, headline singers and not have a ring of light on the white projection surface. And so it really worked well. But unfortunately, they only had the budget for one projection surface. And we rehearsed with casts of thousands who would come marching in with their snow boots on. And over the period of a month and a half of rehearsal, it slowly got darker and darker and darker as it got dirtier and dirtier. And so we kept having to iris the cameras up open, because the projectors are putting out full velocity, and at full velocity, my key light could be 40-foot candles.
Yeah.
So that was like, for the cameras were fine with that. For the audience, it's a little bit low, but cameras are fine for that. By the time we actually went live, I was key lighting at 15-foot candles. Oof. Because the cameras had to keep opening up to accommodate for the fact that the projection was getting dimmer and dimmer with all the dirt on the field.
Yeah.
And so as the cameras opened up, I had to take down the light level.
Oh my goodness.
And by the way, lighting at those kind of levels where 3-foot candles is 20% of your light level, well, 3-foot candles is nothing. I mean, it's just so hard to control light that rigidly. We did it, but it was really, really, really painstaking.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, for an idiot like me, it sure looked good on TV.
Oh yeah,
I remember TV. Watching it. I was very proud of my being Canadian, and the Calgary Olympics wasn't quite as big a deal as this Vancouver one was. It was very patriotic. It was very good. It was just, the whole country was so behind Vancouver at that point, and it was cool. It was really nice.
I remember, though, we were rehearsing Katie Lang on camera, and she's out on this thing out in the center of the arena, and in close up, she looked great. Mm-hmm. She really looked good. It was like, and I glanced up because I was super focused on her close up, and then I glanced up and looked out the window at the field, and I couldn't see Katie Lang for the life of me. She just, as an audience member, it was impossible to see, out there that because the light level again had been dropped so low to match the limitations of the field that for the live audience at times it was a little challenging.
You were sitting there cringing when I was celebrating how profitable they were on this Olympics, because you're like, I know why. They shorted me on everything. Yeah, that's wild. So your plan then is just to do like a couple shows a year kind of thing, things that inspire you, things that you like. It's again, I had a conversation with Lee Rose, I don't know, a month ago or something, and same kind of thing. He's like, yeah, I'm taking the odd show that I like, that I really want to do, but other than that, I'm out photographing Milky Ways. So
Well, I think the what's important is for a project to be nourishing. That
yeah,
it ends up being something that you really feel you've done some meaningful work with, and those environments are harder and harder, I think, to find that that level of control, and it really
yeah,
comes down to that.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, at your level,
and
you're not going to mail it in. You
no,
don't. I'm guessing you don't need the money. You certainly don't need the aggravation. And so, if it's not a great situation, you're probably not going to want to do it.
no, it needs to be fun. It needs
Yeah,
to be.
I completely get that.
And again, with the schedules there and then yes, it can be very enjoyable. I did the opening and closing ceremonies of the expo in Dubai, which was basically done as a television show and a mega projection environment. They had the venue had this big dome that it was an outdoor venue, but it was covered by this big dome with a porous fabric on it,
Yeah,
and they projected on it, and so it was a projection show. And uh, but we were months of rehearsal, and I didn't go for the entire rehearsal, but by the time we got into real uh, rehearsal with cast and everything, I was there, and I was able to again manicure my cues and
yeah,
make them meaningful and contribute to what was the goals of any particular moment in the show.
yeah,
And
yeah. That
usually,
makes sense.
we don't. There's a every moment of a production has a need or a goal, and you need to achieve for that moment. And there's an interpretation
Mm-hmm.
for every moment like that.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a cue basically.
Yeah,
That and having the time to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate and actually execute what you'd like to do, it takes time,
yeah,
and that's something that's just such a rare commodity
yeah.
that it's
Not every
yeah,
show allows for it anymore.
no, no, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. So, do you still get excited about gear? Like, do you still get excited about new gear? Do you still pay attention to new technology that's coming out? And
I I I am afraid though that it's just a reality, but the new gear can refine a lot that we already have.
yeah,
And so they get brighter, more controllable, more precise, better, you know, better color interpretation, better, whatever. Um, but there's only so many tricks that the
yeah.
gear can do.
Yeah, the
Uh,
the the changes now are much smaller. The evolutions are much smaller. Like
and we have really precise instrumentation, really
yeah,
good instrumentation,
it's all
bright.
excellent. Yeah, it's all excellent. It's all bright. It's all, it blows me away. Like every time I look closely at gear, like Ayrton flew me out to their factory in Paris a couple of years ago, and I wanted to look at what breaks in the light. I've been a moving light guy for a long time, and I said, okay, show me the inside of it. First of all, I was blown away because the last time I saw the inside of a moving light was probably at Martin, and it wasn't quite like this. Now it's so clean and it's so well put together, and things are so close together inside it now because the LED source, heat isn't as much of a problem. So they can
Right.
stack a lot more stuff together. And, when I asked the engineer, I said, so what breaks. You know, if I'm going to put these on a show and I'm going to be touring and I'm not going to be going near a city and I need to carry everything with me that's going to break, what do I need to carry? And he goes, I don't know. Like, it doesn't really break, and I'm thinking, are you lying to me? But no, he wasn't. Like, it really is that good now. Everything's that good.
They the the gear and I think heat was a big issue,
Yeah, of course.
but and servo motors and step motors and all these things that
It's all gotten better.
all reacted to and were damaged by heat and
Yeah.
moisture.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. No,
a real
absolutely.
quick moisture story though is
Oh,
um, when I did the Olympics in Salt Lake City, an outdoor venue, and the um, and Verilight developed a new instrument which I call the VL8, and it was a larger wash unit. It was like a mega VL5,
hmm.
and it incredibly effective for especially for a long distance throw, and and so I designed heavily around these instruments that were manufactured for the Olympics,
Yeah.
and they were great. I must tell you, it was just really good. The opening ceremonies were fantastic, and the closing ceremonies were rehearsed, and they were looking really good. And then a giant snowstorm moved through.
Oof.
And unfortunately, I did not know this, but the circuit boards inside these VL8s were not sealed in any way. And so they were not in any way weatherproof.
Oh, no.
And also, unfortunately, they turned off the power to the system due to a security sweep. They had to do it and blah, blah, blah. And that's when the snow hit. So
Oh,
all the
boy.
lights got buried and packed with snow. And when they turned them back on, they just started to fry. and,
Oh, no.
and one by one, they went off. And so we ended up doing the closing ceremonies, I think, with only 40% of the
Oh,
rig
Jesus.
actually functioning.
That's wild.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we had a crew with soldering irons
Oh, no.
working 24 hours a day for days trying to rebuild these instruments. But
Well, I have a
yeah,
moisture story that you'll be able to relate to. So at Martin, we had a new mirror fixture that we had come out with, and it just so happened that the uh, Super Bowl or the Super Bowl was in Miami that year. And, we spoke to the folks doing the halftime show, and they absolutely wanted to incorporate, I think it was 100 of these fixtures or something into the show. And so, yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Brand new fixture. We have no idea how solid or reliable it is to begin with. So we had some problems. At that time, Martin hadn't done a lot of really big shows yet, so they were having data communication issues, especially on longer runs where things were getting a little squirrely the further down the run you got. But one thing that happened, so there were all these lights on the field, and the programmers were working late because you needed darkness, obviously, and so they were out programming these lights on the field, and probably, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock at night, the sprinklers come on. Just out of the blue, no warning. It's not on any of the timesheets or anything. The sprinklers come on. So I remember the Martin one of the techs went scrambling around yelling at people, this water is blah, blah, blah. It's ruining our lights. And he said, your lights are ruining my field. Now get out of my face. And that was when we basically learned, like, the field is the most important thing. The lights are
yeah. No,
so secondary. It
Toma
just,
was the guy that was the groundskeeper. He
yeah.
made it, and I think that was my show. I think that was
Oh, was
Prince.
it?
And
No, this wasn't Prince. This was,
it wasn't.
what year would this have been? 1993, maybe.
Oh no, I didn't do that. No.
Yeah.
But I
I
did do
think it
Prince
was
in
it was
Miami.
Tony Bennett and Patti LaBelle, and I can't remember who else was involved, but yeah, it was. I think
I don't
maybe that
know.
was the year that Whitney Houston sang the national anthem. I can't remember, but yeah, I mean, it
No,
was just crazy. Just all of our lights got soaked.
yeah,
All of our field lights, anyways,
when I did Prince on that in Miami,
which was
halftime.
incredible. That's still my favorite halftime show of all of them.
Yeah,
All of them. I mean,
but he
it was like somebody
we
went, cue the rain. You know?
yeah we programmed it, and the instrumentation, none of it's built really to be doused with hurricane
Right.
force winds and rain, but this is just this phenomenal front move through. And as you know, Prince put a do-rag around his head and went out there and performed, and actually turned out to be better than anyone could
It
have
was
ever
incredible.
hoped for.
That to
But
me was like a moment, like there are moments in our industry. That was a moment for sure.
but I did have lots of lightning strikes and your Martin strobes all around the venue.
Yeah.
And as we went on the air, or as the game started, they were all working. By the time Prince went on, there was only 20% of the strobes working.
No, that's wild. So, one last question that I want to ask you. So, because you say you stay up on gear and stuff, I'm a gear guy. What are like 3 go-to pieces of gear that you got to have on every show you do right now?
They'll probably make you sad, but all 3 would be follow spots, which are
Really?
still a long distance lighting. People still is the most important tool you have.
Do you use LED follow spots now?
Um, yeah, well, you don't have much choice, do you?
Yeah,
I
yeah, it's
mean,
true. Yeah, not so much
but
carbon arc stuff anymore, or
carbon
whatever.
arcs are gone. They've been
Yeah,
legal for decades. But
yeah, yeah.
um, but
What do you use for control now?
pardon?
What control do you use now, or spec?
To be honest with you, I leave that entirely up to the operator.
Yeah,
I don't have any. They're the ones that have to take my blah 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 and turn it into something.
yeah. So you never
And
touch a console?
no,
No.
no, I I'm not the guy to do it. It's not my IQ.
Yeah,
And it really is. It's a very specific IQ. I mean,
yeah.
you have to have a talent there that very few people have to be able to
What?
remember,
Yeah,
how to take because I've also not been a designer that says I'll specify a light, but beyond that, I just want to give a narrative of what I want the light to do. I like it to
that makes sense.
fade up on Beyonce center stage on a 3-second cue, and let's pick a color. Okay, I like that color. Okay, and then that's how I am doing my process.
Yeah,
So the actual console itself,
doesn't matter.
it's whoever's going to interpret my narrative. They have
What
to
they're
have
comfortable
whatever
with.
tool
Yeah,
they can do that with.
yeah, yeah. That makes a ton of sense. No, that's interesting. What, you don't use any automated follow spots yet? Like any of the, whether they're remote follow spots or like Roby, the Roby system, or any of the like follow me systems that are follow
They,
me performer
and
automated.
they're valuable tools.
Yeah,
But can they? And this is again the television. We spend 80% of our broadcast in a close-up.
yeah,
It is a close-up medium, and most of the lighting we do is for the wide shot.
yeah,
The rare, that's where we we celebrate
That's
ourselves.
interesting.
But
Yeah.
the most of the time it's in close up. So we have to send our visual signals through um, the confines of the close up.
Mm.
Now, the tool that is going to be controllable, whether you side light, front light, whether it's flattering and flat, or whether it's challenging and oblique. However you're keying, you want to have a lot of rigid control. And when you're shooting light from a couple of 100 feet away, it's a rare instrument that can get down, say, to an opening that is a foot or two wide from several 100 feet away.
Yeah.
And it's even a rare automated instrument that can actually be that nuanced. Now, head to toe, following head to toe is pretty basic, and so that can be done. But to get into the really, and I'm here to be proven wrong, but
Yeah.
I don't know of an automated instrument that can shoot and maintain that really tight level of control from a long distance.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting pretty good now. I forget what the one that
Yeah.
Act Entertainment has. I always forget what these systems are called, but they've got a sort of a belt pack system where the performer
Yeah.
wears a pack or whatever. And, you can put it anywhere on the body. You can basically cue it into their head or their midsection or whatever you want. But that system seems to work really well, maybe not to the extent that you're saying, but like the Roby system where it's a remote, where they're basically working on a camera backstage or whatever, or in the VOMs or wherever it is. That seems to work really, really well, and
You mean the man operated?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yes.
just,
Yeah, of
you're
course.
just
I mean,
remoting the follow spot operators so that they're
right.
not in the
Which
field
was
of view. Right.
It was a fantastic thing that occurred when we could take actual humans out of the overhead rig.
Right.
Backlight follow spots, side light follow spots, when they could be remote operated.
Yeah.
And now even in smaller venues, like, again, doing the Oscars or something, you're in a regular theater.
Yeah.
I use like 4 manned follow spots, and out of 8 or 10 that will have front of house,
Yeah.
because we always want a selection of angle on that kind of show.
Yeah.
But the half the follow spots, even front of house, will be remote operated follow spots. And by the way, the operators, the crew members, are getting really good at it.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
And so they're a dependable tool.
No, I mean, and it's amazing that on all the big tours and stuff, you're getting, because those are relatively unsafe positions, hanging up there in the rig. And so it makes nothing but sense, not just from a safety standpoint, cost, visual, the whole thing. It just makes a lot of sense. So, yeah.
It really costs a lot of money to put a person in the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
However you're going to do it. But in the old days, again, back in the 80s, I was asked to light the concert sequences for a little movie that Taylor Hackford was doing called The Idolmaker.
Okay.
And I had got asked to do it again because of Solid Gold, and they thought, well, this guy's going to be able to make it look like a interesting concert environment. And I wanted backlight follow spots, but we couldn't. They couldn't fit it in we were shooting in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't put in big platforms back there, which take a huge amount of real estate.
Mm.
So we actually put guys in bosun chairs, and they just hoisted them up. And we had, hanging off of a pipe, we had a little follow spot, and the guys were actually running these things from bosun chairs in the middle of. Well, you never could do that today.
No.
I mean, the OSHA and everything. You can't just lift people up on a rope and have them start
It's incredible.
while dangling from a rope, point
Yeah.
a follow spot.
Yeah.
Um, you
That's
know,
wild.
it's very expensive to put people up in the air now,
Yeah.
and so that, and also you don't have the real estate of the spot that the man needs to occupy. Even when they were in chairs hung from trussing, it still was a big, huge chunk of the overhead space went to that backlight
Well,
follow
and
spot.
with ticket prices as they are these days, you want to sell every seat you possibly can,
Yeah.
and when you're getting into sightline issues and stuff, it's a problem. But yeah,
No, that from a design perspective, the remote follow spots are really one of the greatest innovations over the last 15
yeah, I
years.
agree with you. I think it's fantastic. Well, Bob, I appreciate you doing this so much. Like
No, it's
this has
okay.
been
Just listening
so
to my old
educational.
stories.
I
Sorry.
love it. No, that's why you're here. My show is called Geezers of Gear. So, we're both officially geezers, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate it. I mean, from afar, I've had obviously a high degree of respect for you and your work for 1,000 years. Since I got into lighting in the first place. So I appreciate it. It's been a very educational conversation for me, very enjoyable, and I'm sure our listeners will love it too.
Well, it's kind of fun to talk about, especially the origin of a lot of this stuff.
Heck yeah.
Uh,
No, that's my favorite thing. My
yeah.
favorite thing. All right. Thanks. Thanks so much,
All
Bob.
right.
All right.
Well,
You have a